On a quiet night, a corrupt policeman named Zwick assigns his underling, Miller, to break into a safe. At that time, Miller was working with one of his best friends, Kevin. Zwick then gave them the floor plan of the safe. Then they immediately headed to the location. When they got there, Miller then opened the door very quickly with the help of a particular tool he owned. They then measured and drilled the wall according to the plan given by Zwick. After drilling and opening the safe, they finally got the money from inside the safe, but unfortunately there was a motion sensor that had been placed by the owner, so their actions were detected and known by the police. Kevin looks very panicked, thinking that they will be caught. He is worried about his sister who will live alone if he goes to jail. Elsewhere, Zwick, who had received a report of a theft, said that he would check it out immediately, despite the fact that he was the mastermind of all this. When he arrived at the crime scene, Zwick got out of his car and shot his own car. Shortly thereafter, Kevin came out and Zwick just shot him without saying anything. When Kevin was dead, he put the gun next to Kevin's body. He did all this so that his fellow policemen would not find out his act and slander Kevin for attacking him. A few moments later, Miller came out and looked very angry at Zwick for betraying him. Nevertheless, Zwick didn't seem to care and was still going to arrest Miller for the theft he did and threatened to kill his daughter and wife if he tried to resist. In the end, Miller couldn't do anything. As the story goes, 10 years have passed. Miller had just been released from prison, and on the day of his release, his old friend, Frank, was waiting outside the prison to pick him up. Frank offers Miller to work with him as a locksmith, but Miller is still hesitant to work again considering he just got out of prison. A short while later, Frank and Miller arrived at Frank's home, which also served as the lock repair shop where he worked. Frank then prepared everything Miller needed, including a car that Miller could drive to work. Because of his gratitude to Frank for being so kind to him, Miller finally accepted Frank's offer to work as a locksmith. Miller indeed has skills in breaking into doors and safes, but for now he will only use his skills for a legal job. Miller then called his wife, whom he had left behind for 10 years as he was imprisoned. He invited his wife as well as his daughter to meet at a local cafe. A little while later, Miller met his wife and daughter, Lindsay, who was now grown up, and her mother told him to order a drink and go play for a while so she and Miller could chat. Miller then asked how his wife was doing and apologized for all his actions, and his wife, Beth, said that she had forgiven him and she would also give him a chance to be closer to their daughter, and Miller was very happy for the chance given by Beth and he promised to use it to his best. Beth then said that she didn't want to live with Miller for the time being, and Miller said that it didn't matter to him as long as their relationship remained on good terms. Back at the workshop, while having a small talk, Miller told Frank that he had met his daughter and wife, and Frank was very happy about that, knowing that even though Miller was in jail, his wife and daughter were still willing to accept him back. Frank also advised Miller not to repeat his previous mistakes and that he should make his family his top priority. The next day, Miller, who was sleeping, was suddenly woken up by Frank and he told him to go somewhere as he just received the order from a customer. Miller then began working on repairing the locks of a luxury housing estate. After finishing his work, a man approached him. That man was a wealthy businessman named Garrett, who owned the property. Apparently, he was very interested in Miller, who was well known for his skills as a locksmith, and he intended to use his services to install locks in all his housing. So, of course, Miller was willing and accepted the job, as long as it was legal. Later, he then leaves and, when he arrives at the workshop, he finds a woman waiting for him. The woman is Kevin's sister. However, Miller, who had not seen her for 10 years, could not recognize her. The woman then told him that she was Kevin's sister and introduced herself as April. April then tells him that she currently needs a lot of money, so she asks Miller to do a job for her. Indeed, Miller is willing to do anything for April because he feels responsible for the death of her brother, Kevin. April then told Miller to steal money from her boss's house, but Miller turned it down. He would do anything for April as long as he didn't do anything against the law, because he didn't want to repeat his previous mistakes. When April heard that, she became quite angry that Miller didn't comply with her wishes. Then she left right away. It turned out that Frank heard their conversation. Frank told Miller not to do April's request, but Miller said that he was in a dilemma whether to help her or not. The next day, on his way to work, a policeman came up to Miller. The policeman asked Miller to stop his car. Shortly after, another car arrived, and it turned out to be Zwick's car, the corrupt cop who was also Miller's former boss. Zwick then approached Miller and greeted him and asked him to get out of his car. Zwick then said that he would soon retire from the police, and he said that the two cops who were there were also corrupt cops just like him. Then one of Zwick's men immediately beat Miller. They then found a key that is usually used by thieves to break into safes, and then they brought the key to the office and reported it to their superiors. But their superiors said that the evidence was not enough to be able to arrest Miller again. Sometime later, Miller was interrogated by his wife, Beth, who was also a police officer in that town. Miller said that he was approached by Zwick and his men. Shortly after, the chief of police came out and told Miller to go home right away since he was not proven to have committed any crimes. When he arrived at the repair shop, Frank again warned him to be cautious, and Miller said that he would never go back to his past. Back to the police station. A farewell event for Zwick's retirement is being held at the station. Zwick then says that the police must remain enthusiastic about their duties in his farewell speech. Afterwards, Zwick told Beth to go to his room. Zwick asked Beth to replace his position as head of the section, and Zwick deliberately appointed Beth to fill the position so that he could manage Beth, despite his retirement. But Beth was a little hesitant to accept the offer, because she felt she was not fit to fill the position. But in the end, with some persuasion from Zwick and his two men, Beth finally agreed to Zwick's request. We return to Miller, who was in the middle of honing his door unlocking skills. Then he gets a call from Beth, who asks him to pick up Lindsay, their daughter, as she is busy with work today. Gladly, Miller agrees to do so, because then he has the opportunity to be with his daughter again. Miller then waited for Lindsay at her school, and soon Lindsay came out of class and they rushed home. They then went to the park to eat together. It seems that Lindsay really feels the love of her father. Before she went home, Miller invited Lindsay to stop by his workshop, and there he taught his daughter how to open the lock. After giving a little explanation, Lindsay finally managed to do it. In the evening, Miller and Lindsay went to Beth's workplace at the police station. Beth was very grateful to Miller for making time for Lindsay, and then Miller said that he was very happy to be with his daughter. Then they parted ways and went home. When he arrived at the workshop, he found that April was waiting for him. April said that the boss where she worked was a bad person. After Kevin died, she didn't know what to do, so she decided to become a comfort woman. Then she showed the wounds on her body that were caused by her boss, and she said that she couldn't quit her job because she was constantly threatened, so she asked Miller to steal some money from her boss, which she would use to run away and live in another city. Upon hearing April's story, Miller finally agreed to commit the theft. He said that this was his last, and after getting the money, he asked April not to bother him anymore. April then agreed to Miller's request. After that, April showed Miller the location where her boss lived. She said that tonight her boss would hold a party, and she asked Miller to do the job later in the night. At the police station, Beth, who is now the head of the department, was looking at the files of the prostitutes that had yet to be resolved. She began to think that the previous head of department, Zwick, was not really doing his job properly. In the evening, the party at April's boss's house starts, and April joins the party too. Shortly after, Miller arrives, wearing a mask. After taking a look around, he quickly infiltrated the house, and with his skills as a locksmith, naturally he was able to easily break into the house. It turned out that Zwick was also at the party. He was currently working as an assistant to April's boss. Zwick accidentally saw a suspicious gesture from an unknown person, so he immediately went to check it out. At the back of the house, Miller had broken into the main room where the money was. He managed to get in there after a while, and then he opened the bag which contained the amount of money. Shortly after, Zwick came up to him and a fight broke out between them. After much fighting, Miller finally pointed a gun at Zwick, but he didn't shoot him. He hurried away from there, and Zwick accidentally found a bag of keys that Miller used to use, so he was sure that the perpetrator was Miller. As he was trying to get out of the house, the guards noticed Miller's actions, and he pretended to have April as his hostage. Once he felt that the situation was safe enough, he jumped the wall and eventually escaped. April's boss, who turned out to be Garrett, was furious to see Zwick let the thief escape. He then ordered Zwick to find the thief and bring the money back. Upon arriving at the workshop, Miller hid the money in the safe, and then he called April, but unfortunately April didn't answer his call. The next day, Miller went to April's house and found it to be a complete mess when he went inside. He thought that April might have been kidnapped by someone. In another place, Beth apparently had a guest. The woman is April's work friend. She went to Beth's house intending to give Beth a flash drive containing various kinds of evidence of her boss crimes, Garrett. Not only that, she also told her that Zwick and also his two subordinates, who were police officers, were also involved. Beth then opened the contents of the flash drive, and sure enough she saw and heard all the crimes committed by those corrupt cops. On the other hand, Miller, who had just arrived at the workshop, was immediately scolded by Frank. Apparently, Frank already knew about what Miller had done last night. He said that Miller had done a very stupid thing, and Miller then said that he had to do it to free April from her boss. Frank then told Miller to finish all this as soon as possible, and if the money had been given to April, he asked Miller to immediately stay away from her, and he obeyed Frank's words. At her office, Beth, who was already holding the flash drive evidence, intended to give it to her superiors. A police officer, one of Zwick's men, was suspicious of Beth, and then he asked what Beth was carrying, and Beth said that she was carrying irregular and not too important crime evidence. In his office, the chief of the police, who had heard and seen all the evidence, then said that they would wait for the right time to catch all the criminals. Then he put the evidence file into his desk drawer. In the evening, Miller returned to Garrett's residence. He intended to find out where April was. However, Garrett said that he had no idea where she was, and there was no need for him to keep her. Out of nowhere, Garrett hits Miller with a billiard stick and a fight ensues. Miller knocked Garrett out easily, and then he soaked Garrett's head in the pool and asked him to tell him where April was. Unable to withstand the torture, Garrett finally said that April was currently with Zwick. Miller then immediately rushed away from there. In the distance, April and Zwick saw what Miller was doing. It turns out that April and Zwick have conspired to use Miller's skill to take Garrett's money. A few moments later, Zwick entered Garrett's house, and finally Garrett realized that Zwick was not really working for him, and without further ado, Zwick then shot Garrett to death. As Miller arrives at the garage, Frank keeps advising him to stop doing what he's doing. Shortly thereafter, Beth and Lindsay came to the workshop, and Miller then told his wife that Zwick and some corrupt cops in her office were bad people, and Beth said that she already knew everything and she also had the evidence. Beth also knew what Miller had done, so she asked him to give her the money he stole, which she would later use as an additional evidence, and to secure the money, Miller finally gave the money to her, and then Beth left while Lindsay stayed at the workshop, playing with Frank. At the police station, two corrupt cops were in their superior room. They intend to find the flash drive, the evidence of their crime, in their boss's desk drawer. Elsewhere, Zwick and April have just arrived at a hotel, and suddenly he gets a call from his men. His men said that they are currently under the threat, as Beth and their superiors already know all their crimes. They have voice recordings and images in the flash disk. However, they have now managed to get the flash disk back. Zwick was furious and told his men to kill Miller as soon as possible and take the money that he thought was still in Miller's hands. At the workshop, Miller then got a call from April, and she told Miller to run away immediately, but unfortunately, it was too late. Those corrupt cops came and immediately attacked him. He was shot right in the leg. Frank also tried to fight back by shooting them. Finally, Frank managed to shoot one of them, but unfortunately, Frank also had to be shot dead. The man then took Miller's daughter hostage and made her as collateral if Miller did not hand over the money to him. He then immediately rushed away and took Lindsay with him. Elsewhere, Beth, who had received the report of the shootout at Frank's lock repair shop, immediately turned her car around. Shortly after, Beth arrives and asks where her daughter is. Miller then said that Lindsay was taken, but he promised to save her. A few moments later, Zwick called him and asked for the money back if he wanted his daughter to be safe. Later on, Zwick's men came to meet Zwick and took Lindsay with them. Lindsay was then taken into April's room, and they had the little girl handcuffed inside. April was upset with Zwick for involving a child in this matter. The story continues to a place where Zwick and Miller promised to meet. When Miller arrived, Zwick immediately asked where the money was, and Miller said if the money was in the car, he would give it to him if he released his daughter. But Zwick continued to insist on the money first and told Miller to drop his gun. In the end, Miller was forced to throw his gun and also hand over the money. At the hotel, the corrupt policeman came out to look for April. After calling her several times, she didn't answer his calls, and it seemed that she had already left. Meanwhile, Lindsay was trying to open her handcuffs by using the skill her father had taught her, and in the end, she managed to open the handcuffs. A moment later, Beth arrives at the hotel and she sneaks in to rescue her daughter. Shortly after, Lindsay runs out to escape and the corrupt cop finds it out. He then immediately chases her, and Beth happens to see her daughter and she immediately shoots the corrupt cop to death. Meanwhile, Miller and Zwick are still arguing, despite the fact that Zwick has gotten his money. Zwick intended to kill Miller, but suddenly from the other side, April came and shot Zwick.
That's right, Miller.
In the end, Zwick died horribly. April seems to be still upset with Miller as she still doesn't accept her brother's death. She thinks that Miller is the source of the problem, so she also wants to kill him. All of a sudden, Beth came and pointed a gun at April. However, April still insisted on shooting Miller. Miller then said that he really loved Kevin. He even considered him as his own brother, so there was no way he could trap him and just let him die. April then cried and broke down hearing Miller's words, and then she gave up and dropped the gun. Beth then hugged her and tried to calm her down. Soon the police came to the scene to evacuate them. April was taken to the police station to be held accountable for her actions. The next day, Beth is promoted to lieutenant by her superiors, and in the evening, at the piano recital held by her school, Lindsay played the piano very melodiously and received appreciation from the audience.